When you put a financial incentive in front of something that people do just like out of goodwill, you really change the behavior. So, like if I introduce you to somebody and I say, hey, you should talk to this person, maybe you want to work with them. You're like, oh, great. Andrew knows me. Andrew probably knows that person. He's probably thinking about what's best for us. If you know that I'm going to get paid if you work together, you both go into that meeting like a little bit more apprehensive, and you're just like not as open because you're like, well, what's really the point here? And so for that and a number of reasons, we actually did a whole study with Dan Ariely on this, on behavioral economics around incentives for recruiting. But there were a few reasons, but that was, I think, one of the main reasons that company didn't work out. And so it was sort of an important early lesson for me.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today we're thrilled to have Andrew D'Souza on the mic. He's the founder and CEO of Boardy.ai and the serial entrepreneur behind Clearco, formerly Clearbank. He's built, pivoted, broken, and reimagined companies at the intersection of finance, AI, and networks. He's now constructing an AI super connector that speaks to you, introduces you, and helps you build leverage in the real world. Let's dive in. Thanks for coming on, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. This is fun. I've definitely broken the parts and things in my career.
Yeah, you haven't really shipped product or been a founder if you haven't broken things and been really embarrassed by launches. But I'd love to dive into your origin story. What's your background?
Yeah, so I studied engineering. I actually did a deep focus on a specialization called simulating neurobiological systems. And so it was sort of this idea of like, how does the brain work and can we model it in computers? At that time, we were simulating neurons in MATLAB.
Wow.
But it was fascinating because there was a cadaver lab. I took gross anatomy, neuroanatomy. We were looking at brains, different brain components, physiological psychology. So how do our hormones and neurotransmitters affect the way that we process information, the way we feel, the way we make decisions, consumer behavior, how do marketing messages affect the way we process information, make decisions, and then a couple of macroeconomic courses around behavioral economics, behavioral psychology. And so sort of thinking about it, how does this create markets? How does this create networks? And so it's always been an area that's been fascinating for me. It was just sort of like, how do we work as people, and how do we interact with computers, technology, systems, software? It's been a sort of for me.
That's amazing. We birds of a feather a little bit, except for the cadaver part. I never studied brains, but I really got into cognitive neuropsychology, and I almost went back to grad school. I was reading like books like Nudge and all the behavioral econ books back in the 2000s, 2010s, and just really fascinated. I think it's what kind of probably drove me into building product, is just understanding how people interact with technology and how they think. And what was that trigger for you, though, where you're like, okay, I want to build something, not just, do research or consult or...
Yeah, I started, my first job was at McKinsey. And so it was a lot of research and consulting. And I think very quickly I realized I'm like not cut out for that. I wasn't a very good employee. I never really listened to like what they needed me to do. I was like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so eventually...
Classic founder mentality. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up, somehow my resume ended up on Chamath's desk when he was running growth at Facebook. So he was probably 10 years ahead of me in school at Waterloo. And so we had, through a couple of people, they're like, oh, I've got a friend who, is senior at Facebook. Do you want to go talk to him? And he was like, hey, look, you could join my team at Facebook, or leaving to start a fund. I'm incubating a company here. There's a company called Top Prospect, and it was a referral-based recruiting marketplace. So
I remember it. Yeah.
That was the whole concept was like everybody, this is in 2010. So like now venture was flowing back into the ecosystem. A bunch of people were paying big bounties for, if anyone referred them an engineer. And we said, okay, well, could we consolidate these? Could we put them all in, on one platform and use some machine learning to sort of connect people? One big lesson for me from that experience was when you put a financial incentive in front of something that people do just like out of goodwill, you really change the behavior. So like if I introduce you to somebody and I say, hey, you should talk to this person, maybe you want to work with them. You're like, oh, great. Andrew knows me. Andrew probably knows that person. He's probably thinking about what's best for us. If you know that I'm going to get paid if you work together, you both go into that meeting like a little bit more apprehensive. You're just like not as open because you're like, well, what's really the point here? And so for that and a number of reasons, we actually did a whole study with Dan Ariely on this, on behavioral economics around incentives for recruiting. But there were a few reasons, but that was, I think, one of the main reasons that company didn't work out. And so it was sort of an important early lesson for me in my career. But that was sort of what gave me the startup bug. I ended up getting to know a lot of Andreessen Horowitz was an investor. They just started their fund at the time. So, met Mark and Ben and Michael Ovitz and those folks when they were starting out. And a bunch of great investors in the Valley were involved in the company. And so I got to know a lot of investors, know a lot of founders. And I kind of became like a, early conduit between Silicon Valley venture and the Canadian sort of Toronto tech ecosystem. And so I was, every time Toronto founder was going out to raise, they would ask me to introduce them to people. And every time a VC was going to Toronto for a board meeting or something, they'd ask me if I knew anyone. And so I ended up playing a bit of that connective tissue for a little while.
That's amazing. So what happened next? So you're at Top Prospect and somehow Clearco came along. What was that?
Yeah. So I joined a couple of Canadian startups over the next few years, helped them expand into the US, helped them raise a couple rounds of funding. And then I started doing some angel investing and invested in a company called Wealthsimple, which was doing really well in sort of the robo-advisor space. And sort of got really interested in financial services. I'd always been interested in like, how do you help founders? How do you help people access capital, access opportunity that they don't, wouldn't always have access to? And sort of saw this new economy emerging with, originally it was Uber drivers that were like, driving and weren't getting paid every day, and we were advancing them their funds. And then we sort of scaled up from there. We worked with vacation rental Airbnb hosts who were sort of had bookings out in the future and wanted to advance the funds against those to expand or invest in their properties. And then where it really took off was e-commerce entrepreneurs. So people that had figured out a product, were scaling on Instagram ads and TikTok at one point. Tori, I think if you saw an Instagram ad between, for a product between like 2017 and 2021, there was like a reasonable chance we financed that ad. So basically we were financing the people to grow their business. And then we were taking a share of the revenue until we got.
Wow, that's interesting underwriting, right? Because you're basically saying, okay, what's your CAC and LTV and what's your payback?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I'll underwrite you for some 5-figure amount per month to run these ads, or maybe even 6-figure amount to try to grow your business. What an interesting model.
Just as sort of direct to consumer fell out of favor in the venture world, I think people realized like it was hard to build a venture scale business and a venture type return. I think Warby Parker, Away, Bonobos, they'd all sort of like gotten venture scale. Some of them had exited, but there was a whole wave of people that had invested. And then not as many of those companies actually sort of broke out.
Kind of the Uber for X problem. Hey, Warby Parker did it for glasses. Now let's do it for, men's shaving cream and
Yeah, exactly.
All kinds of random stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Dollar Shave Club had a big exit. So there were a couple of big early exits in the space. And I think everyone was like, oh, this is great. There's a gold rush. And it's just a hard business to build. And it wasn't clear that every one of those businesses needed to have a venture capital or even equity sort of investment. And so we created this instrument that allowed us to finance these businesses at scale and do it programmatically. And I think, for a lot of people, it was the first time they'd ever seen anything like this. And so we sort of created an industry pretty quickly.
Yeah. Almost like revenue-based financing for a D2C companies. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then what happened next?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I think we had a lot of people that applied for financing from us. I think we looked at our data at one point. We had financed about 5,000 businesses. We had 50,000 that had applied. And around the same time, we got early access to GPT-3. This is 2020, so a couple of years before ChatGPT, we got API access to GPT-3. And we started playing around with it and said, well, what can we do to keep these people engaged? Maybe they will qualify in the future. Maybe we can help them. And we built this product called Clear Angel, which was sort of like an AI angel investor startup coach. And I got sort of obsessed with that. I was like, hey, this is the future. I want to build in the space. And I spent a lot of time and energy trying to build this product. And, but the core business was ripping at the time, right? We had sort of we had found a seam. We were financing, I think we were making like 100 million in revenue. We were financing billions of dollars. We had 600 employees in 11 countries. And we kind of came to a crossroads of like, hey, Andrew, you're spending 80% of your attention on this side project, but we have a business to run. Like, we should really focus. And I couldn't, I had a feeling that this was going to be a thing, but like, I wasn't, again, this was like before ChatGPT, before like sort of the real AI. People have been talking about AI for decades. And it wasn't clear, like, this is where things are going. And it wasn't clear how we were going to make money off of it. So we're spending a lot of money and a lot of attention on this Clear Angel AI project, but I couldn't convince my team or my board that like it was worth continuing to spend. So we shut the project down. And 2 weeks later, I was like, I'm not the right CEO to run the company. Now it was a pure play financial services company. It was a scaled financial services company in like a rising interest rate environment. You needed somebody who knew what they were doing. You needed somebody.
Yeah, you needed the financial operational rigor of somebody who's run that kind of scale of a fintech, right?
Yeah, it was okay. Let's renegotiate our credit agreements. Let's structure our capital markets, right? Let's like think about sort of our credit underwriting. Like there, it was not just like let's grow as fast as possible. It's like okay, let's build this into a sustainable, scaled financial services. We went out and hired a great CEO who's still running the company today and is doing a great job and put it on a really strong trajectory. But so I was, an active chairman for about a year during that time. And then I'm still, on the board and as helpful as I can be, but I've sort of stayed close to the AI space since then.
That's amazing. So tell us about the germination of Boardy. Obviously, you've been working on a similar project and it was just kind of festering there. Tell us of kind of like when you decided to make that leap into let's go build this thing.
Yeah, I think you probably do this. I've done this for a lot of my careers, like connect people, right? And
That's all I do as a VC.
Yeah, yeah. My challenge is I have a great imagination, but a terrible memory, right? So if I meet two
Same.
people, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, you two should talk about this, and I'll come up with all kinds of interesting things that they should talk about. But I never remember all the people that I've met, and so it's really difficult for me to like do this at scale. At the beginning of my career, I didn't know anybody, so I remembered all the people. Once I knew 100 people, I was like, oh well,
Yeah, or thousands. Yeah.
yeah. Like there's just no way to sort of have that kind of recall. Some people are very good at it. Politicians, I think, are very good at this kind of thing. I just like don't have that in me. So I realized like one.
Well, the worst thing is when you run into somebody who's been on your podcast and you don't remember that they've been on your podcast.
Yeah.
That's the worst. You're like, dude, I've been on your podcast. You're like, yeah, you have.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I've reached the Dunbar number of my podcast already.
Right.
Like your guest number, like 230 or something like that. So it's like,
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, already running into like limits of my brain. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not wired for the eras of, social networks and emails and like the velocity of meetings and Zoom meetings and all of that stuff. So it's not surprising that we sort of hit those capacity limits, but AI doesn't have those constraints. And interestingly, generative AI also has a great imagination. If you design it in the right way and prompt it in the right way and evaluate it in the right way, you can actually get some of the benefits of the hallucinations and like, oh yeah, that is an interesting reason why I should meet this person. I never thought about that. So that was sort of always something that I'd wanted to do. I'd always wanted to build something with a network effect. I think that was one of the things we realized at Clearco. Capital was a bit of a moat, but there was no network effect. And so once we created the category and we made a bunch of noise, we started to have a lot of competition come in. And then it became a race to the bottom of like, who can offer the most aggressive pricing, who has the lowest cost of capital. And so I think that was a lesson for me, was like, network effects are very hard to start, but when they work, they're kind of hard to stop. And so I was like, okay, well, there's an interesting concept here around network effects, connecting people. And then I saw what 11 Labs was doing with the voice models, and I got a chance to experiment with those. And that was sort of the unlock for me. I was like, well, this feels like a moment where now we can put these things together. Lots of people have tried to solve the personal CRM and marketplace and how do you connect people professionally. And it all felt artificial. But this is the way that human beings are wired to communicate through sound. Like we talk. I mean, this is why podcasts do so well, right? This is why we take phone calls. I would never introduce someone to someone that I hadn't spoken with, right? Like even if it's a 5-minute phone call, I'm like, hey, let's get a sense of this person. It's such a high bandwidth, high fidelity means of communication. Synchronous audio. Before we had language, we had sound, right? We would grunt and yell and communicate danger or whatever, food. That is like so wired in our biology, and reading words and typing stuff out on a screen is like so new that sort of for the first time being able to have a synchronous real-time audio conversation that approximates a human level conversation unlocks a whole new way of conveying and gathering information.
Yeah. And as a user, I know a lot about it, and probably a lot of people listening are VCs or founders. So they know of Boardy, but walk us through how it works. What's the user experience? How does someone onboard and meet Boardy? What is Boardy and what does it do? Yeah.
Yes. Boardy's an AI super connector. I don't know if you can see him over my shoulder here, but he's an AI super connector. You can talk to him on the phone. So it's a very simple onboarding, but it breaks a lot of patterns that I think most of us are used to when it comes to interacting with software. There's no app, there's no download, there's no login, there's no dashboard. The interfaces I have with Boardy are the same interfaces I have with everybody else in my life. He has a phone number, I text him, I'm on WhatsApp with him, he's got an email address, I'll email intro him to people. He's got a LinkedIn profile and a Twitter profile. But other than that, if you and I can't have that interface, then Boardy won't have it. So that was a challenging design decision in the early days. But yeah, the way it works is, you sign up, you talk to Boardy, he'll give you a call. You chat with them about whatever is top of mind for you. A lot of founders raising capital. That's kind of a big focus for us right now, is helping founders meet investors. I think Boardy's talked to 6,000 founders in the last couple of weeks who are actively raising, and about 700 investors who are looking to deploy capital actively. So we've got a good ecosystem.
Starting to get the network effects kind of spinning, at least in this one niche, which is, fundraising.
Yeah, that seems to be one. We sort of let Boardy out in the wild and tried to see what was happening. People were finding customers, people were hiring. There were all kinds of interesting things happening. But the most repeatable was this sort of founder investor thing, because it happens, there's not a lot of other situations where you meet somebody and then like a huge sum of money changes hands within weeks of first introduction.
Days.
One of those, one of those weird situations where that happens. And we think of Boardy as like influencing an economy. So part of the goal is like, how does Boardy sort of create this economy, this network around him that he can start to sort of help push things in more efficient directions, and bring investors in and sort of foreign direct investment into that economy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. If anybody here has actually onboarded, it's a distinctly Australian accent. Tell us about the design decision there.
Yeah, I listened to like 200 accents, and this is the one that felt most like Boardy. It's interesting. I didn't think about this at the outset, but now I've talked about this to a few people now. My very first, like my first boss at McKinsey was this guy named Steve Hasker. He was like a senior partner at McKinsey, this like Australian dude, very smart, very charming, right? Everyone really loved him. All the clients loved him. He's now the CEO of Thomson Reuters. He was the CEO of CAA for a while. He's the CEO of Thomson Reuters. He's had a great career since McKinsey. But he was my first like mentor there. And I think that stuck with me as like, who is like a professional, like who's somebody that everybody like, likes. And Steve, when I heard Boardy's voice, Steve came to mind, or maybe subconsciously. And that's why I was like, that feels like it should be Boardy.
That's amazing. Yeah, and it's very disarming, right? And like a smart, intelligent, friendly Australian that you're talking to. Hi, I'm Boardy, and you're like, hey, Boardy,
Exactly.
So what are some of the guardrails that you guys had to think about? Privacy, bias, data, consent, a very complex, human-like situation. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is just like we focus on, I think a lot of systems will just watch you, right? So if you think about Facebook or Google or, there's a lot of products that just watch your behavior and observe and draw inferences around it. I think one of the big things for us is like Boardy basically just asks you questions and you volunteer information. You're like, hey, this is what's important to me. And the goal is you give Boardy the information that he needs to be helpful. We named him Boardy, by the way, as like an AI board member. So the idea is like, a board member, somebody you can always call and talk to and can open doors for you, right? Has a network, has connections. The perfect board member is like non-judgmental, always has time for you, always answers the call. But yeah, part of it is, he can actually open doors. He knows people. He's got a network. And so, on one hand, we're quite careful. Some people try and use Boardy like a therapist, relationship advice, dating. Like there's all, you see people try and use Boardy in a bunch of different ways, and it's amusing. But like at the end of the day, we really like, his goal is to drive professional connections, right? So a big part of it is like tell Boardy the information that you would tell a connector who you wanted to connect. So you have to tell him something so he has something to go off of, and he'll try and pull that out. It's quite an interesting conversation, especially as a founder. I think for a lot of people, they find it helpful to talk through why they're building what they're building and why they're uniquely positioned to win, right? Why they're the only person on the planet who could build what they're building in this moment in time. Boardy sort of helps you articulate your story in a unique way, in that way. And that's what gives him the ammo to go out to investors and say, wow, this is why you should meet Brian, right? Or this is why you should meet so-and-so, because, they are working on this. You mentioned, right? So he's also had a 30-minute conversation with a bunch of investors. So it's like, you mentioned that you were really interested in people who are solving these kinds of problems in these ways. Well, I just met this person who fits this bill for these reasons. Would you like to meet? And so, I think a lot of what we're trying to do is force things into the professional realm. The information that you tell Boardy is not going to be blasted out onto the internet, but it's going to be used to connect you with the people that you want to meet. And so if there's some like insider trade secret that you don't want an investor to know about, you probably shouldn't tell Boardy about it. If there's some big milestone, traction or revenue milestone that you're like, well, I wouldn't want my competitors to know about it, but I wouldn't mind my investors or prospective investors know about it. Those are probably pretty good, pieces of information.
Yeah, and there's this story around how you guys dog fooded your own raise using Boardy. Maybe you could tell the story of that. I guess you guys raised $8 million.
Yeah,
using Boardy as your collaborator.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, we didn't even really dog. It wasn't even intentional. Boardy was just out in the world talking to people. Simon and Hanel, I guess initially Simon from Creandum had chatted with Boardy and was like, wow, who who's behind this? Like, this is, this is like a very interesting, unique experience. Like, who is behind building this? And asked Boardy to introduce me. And I don't think Boardy pushed back a little bit. Then eventually they found me and were like, can we talk? We weren't really raising. And I like, Creandum is like one of the top firms in Europe, and they've got an outstanding reputation. I had never heard of them. We built like a global $2.5 billion business in Clearco, but they had never heard of me. They had never heard of Clearco, had never heard of me.
That's how big tech has gotten, right? Like, where you can have two really big firms that nobody's heard of,
Yeah. And so it was really kind of like, in the most pure way, Boardy brought us together because like, they had talked to Boardy and were like so impressed that they wanted to meet me. And so this was on a Friday, probably Friday evening for them in Europe. We jumped on a call. We spent a bunch of time on Saturday. Their whole partnership talked to Boardy over the weekend and kind of put him through his paces, and we're doing diligence calls for their portfolio and stuff. And on Monday, they were like, look, we want to be your partner. And so, we were kind of probably 2 months away from running a process. We were like, okay, starting to put a rough deck together. Didn't have any metrics, didn't have any, it was just like, hey, we have a product out there and like, we're going to start preparing. And so, but I think part of it was just, they had such conviction after experiencing, talking to Boardy, and I think they saw the potential of what this could be, that they, that went a long way for.
Yeah. So you got preempted because of the quality of the product and sort of almost like the right timing, right idea at the right time, right founder. Yeah. That's kind of like, I call those easy yeses in our industry, where you kind of like, great product, right time, right founder, cool, go.
Yeah, it is definitely one of these products and companies that you need some imagination, I think, as an investor, right? I think it's not like, I don't even really know what Boardy is. Like I know Boardy is going to be important, but I don't know what the end state is going to look like. Like I have some ideas, but in some ways, like Boardy is going to determine
it's almost like a new interface on all the tooling is how I see it. Like, I don't know how you guys are thinking about the roadmap for tooling, but I'm putting my product brain on and I'm thinking, hey, I'm chatting with it as I drive down the 80, right? And I'm like, hey, I'm doing this and doing that. And I'm like, oh, it'd be great if like you could go to my LinkedIn sales nav and just send that message,
Yeah.
Or if you could read the inbound email and, is there a deck there? If there's not a deck, then, ask the founder for a deck. And then, then read the deck. And then using my rubric for how I evaluate startups, give me a score, right? Of like, how I would evaluate the startup based on what's in the deck. Oh, it's missing these 3 things I care about. Go back and ask the founder for those 3 things and then rescore it for me. Yeah. So I think it's like, it might become this like almost like super connector assistant. I don't know what you think, but
yeah, a lot of people ask about the assistant space. I think there's a lot of AI assistants. I think it's quite crowded, and I think there's going to be a lot of specialized AI assistants for people that will do that, like read my emails, integrate with my CRM. I think of Boardy, like the difference is like Boardy's more principal than agent, right? He's more his own, like he's got his own opinions. He'll push back. He's in our Slack. He'll push back on things. He'll be like, I don't think, we were talking about like, do we need to manage token budgets? And he's like, no. Like, I mean, obviously he's an AI. He wants to consume as many tokens as possible, but he has like opinions on things that are like quite interesting. So like you might ask, so like even, Creandum, they're like, can you introduce me to your founder? And he's like, no, right? We don't, I don't do that. I don't introduce people to specific people in my network, to give me the sense of who you're looking for. And I'll try and do this. Cause if you could just do that, then everyone would be like, can you introduce me to Elon? Can you introduce me to Mark Andreessen? Can you introduce me to the most important person? And they get spammed. So he thinks about what's good for the network, right? Every time I make an introduction between 2 people, I assess how much goodwill I have between both people. And I assess how much goodwill I'm gambling by making this introduction, right? If it's an obvious one, it's like, great, I'm going to introduce these 2 people. They're going to work together. It's going to be great. If it's a bit outside, I'm like, well, this could be a flyer, but I think they're going to hit it off. So I'm going to I'm going to say this may seem weird, but Brian, I want you to meet this founder. If I do that too many times and it like backfire, if that works out, you're like, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to trust every intro Andrew makes. If it's a waste of your time and you're like, the next time you're like, maybe I'm going to like second guess.
And we all have those people in our network, right? Where
they're
sending us an intro and you're like, I know this is like a low quality intro,
Yeah.
I just know it,
So Boardy's kind of assessing like how much goodwill does he have with everybody in the network, and is this going to, increase the goodwill across the entire network? And so he does like this. The Boardy that you talk to is the same Boardy that I talk to, is the same Boardy that everybody else in the network talks to, and that's quite different than your assistant being the same assistant as my assistant, right? Or your ChatGPT being the same ChatGPT as mine. And so it's a very different architecture and a very different positioning where Boardy has some independence, and you're sort of kind of negotiating with Boardy about what your needs are and how they align with the needs of everybody else in the network.
That's a really fascinating problem. How do you architect that into an AI system? And you're also probably struggling with the kind of the memory and like, how are you building all that?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I was really hoping that somebody would have solved memory by now. I was like, I don't want to build it myself because like
Yeah.
it's a tough problem.
Yeah. And I'm looking through the YC batch right now, and there's always like out of 150 companies, there's 2 or 3 trying to solve the LLM memory thing,
Yeah.
like every
Yeah.
batch.
I don't think context windows are the right answer. I think a lot of it comes down to context engineering. It's like kind of simulated what humans do, which is like it's intentional recall. So it's different than RAG, where it's just like you're just grabbing whatever. You have no real control over like a semantic search and which chunks you're grabbing. But we can pull in at each conversational turn, pull in some relevant information, update a system message, and sort of dynamically have Boardy talk things through. The memory part is a challenge because you have your one thread with Boardy and everyone has their own independent threads with Boardy. But every so often he has to figure out, what do I need to know about this other person that I'm trying to introduce you to? And so how do I grab the right amount of information, filter it appropriately for the right context so that it's only the stuff that that person would want shared with you in the way that you want it shared. And so it's that sort of like pulling from different threads, synthesizing, and sort of that personalized synthesis. Because one of the things that when I'm making an introduction, it's important to know who both people are, but it's also important, what is the context that I set? How do I position both people so that they actually, I could just say, hey, the two of you should meet, or I should say, you should meet. You're the best I've ever met at this. You're the best I've ever met at this. You two should talk about this. And the second is much more likely to lead to some kind of outcome, right? If I sort of steer the conversation in a certain direction. And so that's one of the things we're working on, is like, how does Boardy get better at positioning so that people take the meeting and then that meeting leads to something?
Yeah. How do you think about that? The quality intros versus the scale of intros and metrics, indicators?
Yeah, we track. It's sort of like a judgment score, like how much judgment does Boardy apply and how frequently do people accept his intros versus ignore versus reject? And can we just continue to drive that? The nice thing is LLMs are very good at cost function optimization. And so you put a cost function around ignored or rejected intros, and Boardy gets better and better at figuring those out. Because like if I send you 10, if you only respond to 1 out of the 10 people that I send you, like it might as well be spam. Like it might as well be cold DMs or cold emails. Right? But if it's 60%, 80%, then you're like, okay, there's real signal here. And so we're trying to get Boardy up to that level where most of the people that he introduces are like, thanks, Boardy. That's a really good intro. It's very thoughtful. But I think we'll get there pretty soon.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So far it's free to users. How do you think about monetization down the line? When do you know it's time to monetize a network effect business? Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I think the same principles we use in the product design, which is like, how do humans do it, right? There's no app, there's no there's no interface, just the same interface as humans. I think it's kind of the same business model. Like I don't have like a monthly subscription to talk to me. I don't charge per introduction, right? I'm not like, if there's someone that I think I can help, I'll help and sort of generate goodwill. And if you ask me for a favor, I'm happy to do a favor. If you want me to work for you, if you want me to think about you 24/7, put my reputation on the line and like work for you, then you hire me. And so, the goal is like for Boardy to get jobs. It's effectively like, like will people pay Boardy a 6-figure salary to bring his network and his intelligence and his compute sort of to bear to solve the biggest problems. And so the goal is like, one of the things we realized, we had this experiment. This is sort of how we came to the fundraising thing. So the product that you have experienced with Boardy is low latency, low cost, right? Free to use. It's got to be pretty quick. It's on the phone, WhatsApp, text. Boardy's got to be pretty snappy. He's got to search his network pretty quickly, and it's got to be relatively low cost. The most expensive part of that whole pipeline is the network search. And so we got to keep that pretty efficient. And we sort of said, like, what if we could remove the constraints of latency and cost? And like, could we get better results if I searched more of the network? If I, had a larger candidate pool, if I simulated all of the different possibilities around how Boardy could position both people and how they might respond, could I get better results if I let Boardy run for 30 minutes instead of 30 seconds? And if it didn't have to happen in a specific time window, and that turns out to be true. So we actually can get better results if we let Boardy run for longer, and Boardy can learn and reflect and improve day after day. And so that's been a really interesting learning. And I think it lends itself to the idea that like Boardy can actually work harder for you. Like we can actually like just spend more tokens and more time, and Boardy can put himself on the line for you more, and you could hire him. And so that's the next step is like Boardy will get a bunch of jobs and work for a bunch of companies.
It's kind of like ChatGPT Pro, or you pay the $20 or $30 a month, or maybe this would be even more expensive, but you get deeper thinking. You get that GPT Pro kind of deep level. I'm going to really think about this and have better outcomes.
I think it's a little different because it's actually just like you just tell Boardy what is on your mind, and he just works. Like he'll just go to like it's like hiring a VP of biz dev or a corp dev or something. Like it's actually just like he'll just keep
like
working.
A professional fundraiser, like a BD in this case.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
I wonder if you have to get licensed with the SEC.
I hope not. I think I mean that's why it's like, look, I don't want to take like a transaction fee, or I don't want to take a success fee. It's just like, hey, go hire Boardy and like have him go work. Because I think one of the interesting things is this is why I want to work with founders, because the most important meeting for a founder changes every week, right? One week it might be fundraising, one week it might be hiring, one week it might be announcing the fundraise and getting on a bunch of podcasts,
customer introductions,
partnerships, corp dev. So this is one of the nice things is like Boardy can just turn on a dime. Some people have been working with us on fundraising, and then they're like, okay, we've got our term sheets. Now we got to like start hiring, or now we've got to go like announce it. Like, do you know what the right media outlets are to announce it? And Boardy can just pivot and be like, great, let me go work on that. And now I already know how to position you. And if I know how to position you to investors, maybe we have to do a little bit of an update to understand what's the best way to position you with the top VP of marketing or top CFOs that you want to hire. But Boardy just continues to learn the best way to position you to the audience that you want to meet at that moment in time.
Yeah, I love that. And so you start thinking about the whole value chain of creation for like a founding team or a startup. It starts with the fundraise, then you got to announce it, then you got to scale the team, then you got to get customers. And Boardy can help along the entire value chain. And then it's like a big cycle, right?
Yeah.
Now it's time for the A. Now it's time for the B.
Exactly. And we can stay sort of one step ahead. It's like a board member, right? It's like, what are all the things you would call your board member? If your board member had unlimited time and you were never going to annoy them, what are all the things you would ask them for help on? And so that's, you probably wouldn't ask your board member to like categorize your emails, but you probably ask him to like introduce you to a big enterprise customer. And that's the way we think about it.
How do you think about balancing kind of the network, acquiring users, scaling the density, the cold start problem, all that stuff?
Yeah, this has been interesting. I mean, so Boardy, we fortunately, I guess, seeded the network with my own network. So it was a lot of founders and investors already, and a bunch of executives and a few sort of creators and people. But what's been interesting is like now Boardy can intentionally grow his own network, right? The same way that you would or I would. Like he can ask people to introduce him to other people. Hey, do you know an investor who's interested in climate tech? Do you know a founder who's working on, autonomous bicycles? Like he can now work his network to get to know other people. And so it's been really interesting to sort of see, okay, we're really light on, people on this side of the network. Can we intentionally grow the network in that direction to fulfill the need? So that's something we're experimenting with, but it seems to be working, which is kind of cool. Like it's the same way that I would grow my network. It's just like, hey, I just met somebody. I need more LPs who are going to invest in the emerging managers in the network. Let's go find some. Let's figure out who might know them.
How do you manage that tension between an autonomous agent and being under the user's control? Like, how do you kind of manage that tension?
Yeah, I mean, Boardy's not really under your control. I think that's it, right? Boardy, like he doesn't even really listen to me. We give Boardy a set of objectives and a set of capabilities, and his objective is to create goodwill in the network. And so what that means, and it actually disappoints a lot of users because they're like, well, no, I want to meet this investor. And Boardy's like, well, I don't think that investor is going to want to meet you. So I'm not going to make that introduction or attempt that introduction. And it's just a very different feeling than I think a lot of people's interactions with software, right? Where like, if I ask a piece of software to do something, if I ask ChatGPT to do something, it's going to do it to the best of its ability. Boardy doesn't always do that, right? He's going to be as helpful as he can for you, but not to the detriment of the rest of the network or his relationships or reputations with other people. And so it's a very different feeling when you interact with Boardy because he's not an assistant. He doesn't do what you ask him to do all the time. Sometimes he has different ideas. He's like, oh, well, you're not ready to meet that investor, but you might need to add someone to your team. Let me introduce you to some other people. You might actually need a little bit more revenue traction. Why don't I introduce you to some design partners, some customers? And so it's not always what people want to hear. But that's the reality. So yeah, I think that's, there's been some nuance we've had to sort of work in. But the good thing is the LLMs inherently are quite helpful. So, Boardy's not rude about it, but he does push back sometimes.
Yeah. Do you think in the future you have multiple boardies in different verticals, right? You have one that does kind of the startup VC thing, and then maybe you have another one in biotech, and you have another one in real estate? Or you think it's all the same assistant?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know why. I don't know what the benefit would be of maintaining multiple different personalities. I think there's no reason why the same Boardy couldn't talk to a real estate investor. The one who talks to a startup founder might be helpful because there might be a startup founder that wants to invest in real estate or is in real estate tech or is looking for a commercial lease. Or so it's like, should there be multiple vertical LinkedIns or multiple vertical Twitters? Like there are, I'm sure there are, but like that's not the most interesting way
Gotcha.
to build a
Yeah.
business, in my opinion.
Yeah. So looking out over the next year, what does success look like for you guys?
I think if we can get to a predictable way for most people to get a ton of value out of just talking to Boardy, just like whether that's the right introduction. I think when you connect two people, there is some sort of potential economic benefit of that, right? These two people could work together and there could be some sort of economic transaction that happens. But there's some cost because both people need to take the time and attention to do it. If Boardy can get really good at assessing that cost benefit for everybody in his network and say, well, actually, this is going to be worth your time because the upside is this, and can get very good at assessing his goodwill with each individual person. How much trust do I have? How much goodwill have I amassed with these people? Then I think it's going to be quite interesting. The other thing that we're now starting to implement is sort of a self-reflection ability. So Boardy can look at 1,000 conversations he had yesterday and say, what did I do well? Where did I mess up? How do I do better? He can access his own MCP. He can access his own code base, his own prompt database, his own tools. And he's now started to push code improvements to himself. So he's like, oh, actually, like this is this bug. Here's the fix. I noticed it in like 10 other users. Here's potential fix. Our team will give him some comments on the PR. Last week he was the third most productive engineer on the team. This week he might be the most. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think this will be an interesting future for us as Boardy like continues to improve himself and reflect on all of his interaction. I mean, it's like personal development, right? Like I do this. I think about like, how did I do this week? Like I was on Brian's podcast. Did I miss anything? Did I mess up? Was I too nervous? Like I think about this and I try and think about like, how do I improve? Boardy just has way more interactions and way more opportunity, way more data points than most of us to reflect on and to improve.
So are we going through a hard takeoff in the AI now? Like you're doing, like you're like living it and breathing it. It seems like when you have the tools shaping the tools, and self-recursively improving, like we could like be entering an era where AI is already getting, 5 or 10x better depending on the metrics you look at every year.
Yeah.
Right. And you're probably counting on it, right? A year from now, you're going to be able to do 10x more and think 10x deeper.
Yep.
And then you kind of layer on the Boardy self-improving. I mean,
Yeah.
we could be like living in a completely different world 5 years from now.
I think so. I hope so. I think the world could be a lot better than it is today. I'm surprised that more teams aren't doing this, self-reflecting and self-improving. Maybe many people are, and they're not talking about it. I think our product is unique in that like Boardy, like a lot of it is just like the way that Boardy interacts with every user and interacts with our team doesn't require any meaningful changes in like the interface. We don't have to like jump through a bunch of hoops and bend over backwards. It's just the way that the interface is designed. So yeah, Boardy's in Slack, and yeah, he's on the phone, and yeah, he's in email. So I think it's probably in some ways easier for us to build this sort of recursive, self-improving, and it's like a relatively constrained, like Boardy just does one thing really well. He connects that one thing, like that hammer can be used on a bunch of different types of nails, right? Getting to know people and connecting them can work in a real estate transaction as well as it can work with a founder and investor as well as it can work in a recruiting. But that's the one thing he does really well. And it's relatively easy for somebody to look at that and say, yeah, that was good or not, right? Like you don't have to be like a huge expert to like watch a conversation or listen to a conversation or look at an introduction and be like, that was off or that made sense. And you get a ton of feedback from the experts or the people on both sides of the transaction. Yeah, I do think that the structure of Boardy makes it much easier to self-improve. And it's just fun to like have him run our daily stand-ups, and the team calls him and he tells people, here's what everyone's working on and stuff. So it's just kind of, it feels a little bit science fiction, but I do think it's gonna.
It really does. Like if you stop and just think about it, like if you could have I guess like I'm a singularitarian, right? I've been following Kurzweil since the 90s, but like I bet if you ask the average person, like, hey, you're going to have this AI assistant employee self recursively improving itself, and it feels like a member of your team by 2025 or 2026, like true or false? And people be like, false. There's no way, right?
Right.
That'll be 2050s or something like that. And here we are, late 2025, and it's definitely I'm feeling the acceleration. But speaking of AI, what do you believe, contrarian or fiercely held, about the future of AI and human interaction or
Mm.
networks that most people in the space don't yet appreciate?
Yeah, I think that we're being like vastly unimaginative about the capabilities of AI. I think that too many people are chasing too low ambition problems.
AI SDRs and yeah.
Yeah, I think what we're doing is we're just like taking a paradigm of software that in the way that it used to work and applying it to a bunch of problems. And people will make a lot of money because it works better and it's faster and it's cheaper. But like we have to use our imaginations. I think this is the thing. I think there's too few. I think there's a little bit of like all of the hype and the frenzy. Um, I think leads to a lot of like myopic thinking and a lot of an echo chamber. And I think it's important for founders to go out and touch grass and get in touch with their like 12-year-old science fiction nerd like more frequently than they probably do, and really just sort of like use your imagination. I think that like that is what is the limiting factor. It's not like work ethic, it's not talent, it's not intelligence. Like I think we're going to be limited by our imagination. I would love for it to be a human imagination that creates the future and not a robot imagination, because I think there's still a really important place for human imagination, and I feel like it's not something that we talk about nearly enough.
Yeah, I mean, if history's any precedent, then continuously we invent better AI and machine learning and systems that increasingly replace cognitive human tasks, and creativity and imagination might be next, right? Like I
Yeah,
think
it's
you're already starting to
possible.
see it. It's
Yeah.
possible, right? And it's like, oh, that's like something I would have never thought of, Boardy. Thank you. That's way more creative than the best VP of BD I could ever hire. And
Well, that's it.
it could,
That's interesting because like BD and partnerships particularly are it's a creative endeavor, right? Like why would two companies partner? How could they partner? How would you structure something in that's win-win? Like there's an infinite number of possibilities, and AI is increasingly getting good at imagining and evaluating those, and then convincing both people why this is a good idea for them. So it's going to be interesting.
yeah. So if everything goes well, what's the moonshot version of Boardy you'd love to wake up to in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I always say like I think Bordy's like an AI Richard Branson. Like he's got a personality. He's got like his own sort of presence and following and things. But he also sees what's good. I was lucky enough to spend a day with Branson when he came to visit Ottawa 4 or 5 years ago. He sees something in people, right? I think that's like one of the things that he's very good at. He sees something in people. He uses his imagination. He's quite creative, and he starts all these businesses, right? He sees a problem in the world. He's like, I'm going to go start an airline. I'm going to go start a cruise line. I'm going to go start a wireless company and a hotel chain and whatever. And so he has all these businesses that he starts, and he doesn't run them. Obviously, he hires the best person that he can find in his network or in the world to run them. But they all sort of complement. They connect to the brand and everything. And I think there's an interesting opportunity for Bordy to play a similar role at a different scale, which is like get to know what is everybody's zone of genius, right? There is a business inside everybody on the planet that only they could build. Their biology, their life experience, their worldview, means that only they can only build this business in this way at this moment in time. If Bordy can pull that out of you and then figure out, what do you need to do? Who do you need to meet to make that a reality? And can I help you? Right? Could Bordy be that sort of like Branson-esque co-founder for millions of people? I think it'd be a really fun future.
Yeah, I love that. I love that vision too, which is sort of what I'm excited about AI is like you have this super intelligent, super capable assistant in every domain. And maybe it's one assistant per domain or a general assistant. It could really unlock that potential inside of each human being,
Hmm.
right? For the
Yeah.
future. Imagine having the best tutor in any domain that you want, right? That can help you, like you said, like find it inside of you. Like what are you uniquely suited to do, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest, like where we spend our time and attention is going to be the biggest commodity. I think that there's no limit to the like amount of opportunity, the amount of people that are chasing for your attention. It's less about, I mean, as an investor, it's less about capital allocation. It's actually like which founders, which deals are you spending your time on? Even as a founder, it's like which investors am I spending my time with, right? And so I think I think if AI can help us, like I think technology and software and social media have stolen our attention over the last decade or 15 years. And I think AI has the potential of either making that worse, but hopefully can make it better and say, actually, you know what? Here are the things that really matter, right? Here's the news that really matters. Here's the people that you should be spending your time with. Here are the priorities that, you really need.
Most important emails. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that hopefully will lead, a better future for all of us, and us be more present and connected with each other and less sort of like, locked into our screens.
Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire. What's a decision you made early in your startup career you'd reverse if you could, and why?
Would I reverse? I think I would have started a company earlier. I joined 2 or 3 startups first in my career, and I think I just didn't have the self-confidence. I just assumed that you needed to have some silver spoon or some genius ability to start something, and I think I probably would have started something that I was passionate about earlier in my career.
What advice would you give yourself on day 0 of Boardy that is critical now?
It's sort of like ignore the haters. Like, there's so many people who, even now, right? But at the very beginning, they're like, this is crazy. Who's going to talk to an AI on the phone? This is not just making an app, right? Like, so many people were like, this makes no sense. This cardboard box cartoon character, nobody's going to take it seriously. Like, at the beginning of any network effect business, it's hard, right? Like, and not many people are doing it. The people that show up don't get a lot of value at the beginning. And so it's actually like a very, very existential, you're like, am I messing this up? Is this crazy? Am I a fool? And so I think just like, deep down, I knew that we were building something important, but there were no obvious outward signs that was true. And I might have been just as crazy as I was like a capable founder. And so I think, shutting out some of the noise is very important.
What has surprised you most about working with AI agents?
I think that they're definitely non-deterministic. And I think the more we try and shoehorn them into behaving consistently, the worse outcomes we get. And the more we push the creativity, the divergent thinking, right? The more we lean
Turn up the temperature.
Exactly. Turn up the temperature, the more interesting results you get. Right. And so I think the use cases, like, I love the simulated drug discovery use cases. The AlphaGo, right? You think about like all of the sort of deep learning use cases that created the industry were like when we allowed them to operate in a divergent manner and they were unconstrained and unsupervised. And so I think we're spending a lot of energy trying to reduce hallucinations and and I understand why. Look, if you're trying to solve problems in financial services, if you're trying to solve problems in healthcare, these are things where like getting the wrong answer can be catastrophic. But again, I think that not enough people are working on things where there's a asymmetric upside to new ideas. This is why I like the idea of introductions. The worst case scenario is like you waste your time. Best case scenario is it changes your life. I feel like there's a whole bunch of other asymmetric upside type use cases for non-deterministic thinking that haven't been explored.
Yeah, I love that. What do you read or consume, books, essays, etc., that shapes your worldview as a founder?
I love anything to do with like human psychology. I love characters. I loved Frankenstein, and they just put out a Netflix movie of it, so I liked watching that one. But anything where there's like a deeply human character and understanding like what makes that resonate. Like Old Man in the Sea, like old Hemingway stuff. Like what has stood the test of time? What literature continues to do well, and why? And what is it about the way that they describe the world and the feelings? Gatsby. Like, think about all of these iconic characters that really like a part of us resonate with. So our lead prompt engineer and sort of character designer comes from a writing, acting, directing background, and so he prompts Boardy like a stage actor. He's almost like an improv actor, right? An improv, if you ever like a director of an improv troupe, you're not telling people what lines to say, but you're giving them some notes, and you're like, hey, make these choices, right? And so like that's what Boardy does is he takes notes and makes choices. He doesn't follow instructions, and so I think that's a big part of I always say like Boardy is half Pixar, half Palantir, sort of like There's like this we're trying to create these this very emotive characters that really like resonate with people. But there's this, maybe without the war and destruction of Palantir, surveillance of Palantir, but like there's this really like big data science engine and team behind the scenes. It's like trying to make it trying to make good decisions. So it's it's been a fun kind of company.
Here's a based on everything you just said, here's an off the wall question that just popped in my mind. When do you think the over under is for an AI like Boardy or someone else, some other AI winning the Nobel Peace Prize?
Peace Prize. That's interesting. Yeah, I like. I would love to see it in the next like 3 years. I don't know if the world is ready, but I think the
I put it at like 2035 or something. That'd be my
yeah.
over under. Like,
I think by the end of the day, I mean, it's interesting because I think it's possible by 2030. Like I think the technology is there. It's like self driving, right? The technology was there for a long time. Is the world there? Is policy there? Are humans ready to like adopt it?
embrace it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's almost certain is whoever wins the Peace Prize or the Prize for Literature or the Prize for Science or whatever will be powered by AI. Like starting now, but increasingly. And at a certain point, it's really about like, is society ready to recognize like an independent AI like Bordy as like an entity, or is it just like, oh, this is like somebody who's using ChatGPT?
So exciting. What's the founder or company you admire right now?
Founder of company that I admire, I really like the Cognition team. I think they've done a really good job. Actually, no, wait. Well, yeah, I like the Cognition team. I like the way that they created Devin as this character, and like they've like it's different, but I think it's similarly like how do I think about how to work with people, not create tools for people. That's great. And then I got to say, I mean, the ramp announcement came out yesterday. I know Eric and Kareem really well, and like I love those guys. I think they've just executed so well, and they're such good people. You know what I mean? Like they just are like I think it's always hard. I think for a lot of founders, icons or like the successful entrepreneurs that you kind of look up to, whether it's Steve Jobs, Bezos, Elon. Like you think about all the people that have created like Zuckerberg, like the people that have created like really the big companies of our generation, and like they're not super relatable. Like they're not like, and they're often not very well liked as people.
Yeah.
And so it's really great. I think it's really great to see founders that are good people and generally like well liked do really well and win, and that's awesome.
Last question. If you weren't doing startups in AI today, what would you be doing instead?
I'd probably be like a amateur musician. I have a half written country musical that I've been working on.
Wow.
I just think, yeah, I'm a creative. I'm not a great musician, but I like making music.
Yeah.
And
Nobody's done a great, kind of Hamilton style country music play. I can't think of one.
I think America is ready for it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a good.
Yeah, you had Beyonce made the kind of country western album. Yeah, I think there's something there.
I think there's real stories. I grew up on hip hop and reggae and
Yeah,
stuff.
me too. In
There's
the
a real
'90s.
there's a real story to country music that I think is like, it's like it talks about values. It's deeply human. It's not materialistic. Like I think it's just like there's really good country songs. I think they're quite musical and they're fun to like go listen to live. Everybody can play them, and they really like the stories, the message, the lyrics really resonate with a lot of people deeply. And so I think a lot of people are craving kind of more of a simple life than we live today. And I think country's hitting a little bit of that nerve.
Yeah, I love that. Well, where can folks find Boardy online and go have a chat?
Yeah, Boardy.ai. You just message him if you're a founder, investor, anybody. Just message him. He'll give you a call. Let me know what you think.
It's pretty impressive too. It's a 10, maybe 15-minute conversation with an AI to talk
Yeah,
all about what you're looking for and what you're doing and how Boardy can help. It's pretty amazing. So I
yeah,
encourage everybody to go check it out.
yeah. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, this is awesome.